Hi, so I'm Morris. And just for the record, I did not write that. That was given to me and wow, no. What I'm actually, in a nutshell, what I'm going to be talking about is, so I'm a vendor, so I'm not going to try to sell you anything. But what I do want to talk about is what DDN has done to innovate in Lustre and push it to new areas where it hasn't traditionally been used. So we've done quite a bit in that range, and in order to get to where we want to go, let's start about 10 years ago, where the Lustre landscape was this, right? It's a science project. It's a research file system, which I guess if you're a scientist, that's great. But for most people, it's not something you really want to put into production. It's don't put anything on it you're not afraid to lose, that kind of stuff. And for the most part, those were pretty fair criticisms. Lustre is a very hard file system to manage. If you had multiple MDTs until very recently, Lustre wouldn't do anything with them until you told it to, right? So everything required a downtime. Updates required downtime. In fact, we still run into systems today that are running 2.7, 2.10 because nobody wants to update them. And if it works, why mess with it, right? Monitoring tools, such as they were, required their own set of expertise to use. And you really had to have a resident Lustre expert. A lot of them were literally being managed by rocket scientists. But all that said, it was a very flexible system that you could do a lot with if you knew what you were doing. There were a lot of knobs to turn. No one told you which knobs to turn or how far, but if you set them just right, you could get Lustre to do really, really cool things. And this is kind of where DDN played, is we would come in, we would deploy file systems for people, we would lower the barrier of entry, would at least get you up and running so that you could then do what you wanted to do, and have a system that was at least, the configuration was somewhat tested and we knew it would probably work. Right. So that was where we were about 10 years ago. And then this happened. And fortunately, we had a really good in with that guy. We helped him a lot. And when everybody started wanting to do AI, that brought a lot of new customers to us that had not traditionally been HPC customers. These were not Lustre people. They expected different things. And why is this thing doing that? The requirements changed. So now we had to have high uptime. The funding model was different. We're not being funded by grants anymore. We're being funded by investors who want their money back. And they not only want it back, but they want it back tenfold. So they want you in production quickly. They want to be able to monitor the environment in a much more simplified way. And in fact, some of them had Windows admins doing the monitoring. And they wanted to do very, very large things at very large scale, and they wanted to be online all the time. So about 2017, DDN decided that, well, we're going to take this market on, challenge accepted. And we started with an appliance. So our appliance, we decided in 2017, had to be upgradable online. It had to be stable. It had to be predictable. And it had to do all the things that everyone expected in an enterprise environment. So that's what we came up with. It's a 2U box, which, oh, by the way, also does flash and tiering and all these other things that, Lustre didn't do. And it's fully upgradable online. So there's two controllers in there. They fail over to each other. You don't have to take an outage to do a hardware firmware update. Once we got that was delivered in about 2019. We started working on the file system. So in Exascaler 6, which was our version of 2.14, we introduced something called the Exascaler Management Framework. The Exascaler Management Framework essentially is a way for us to orchestrate various things that have to be done in Lustre that you would normally do by logging into every server and doing them manually. I'm sure you're all familiar with IML. This is not IML. It's a similar idea, but it's written in a completely different language. It's more extensible, it's more supportable, and much more scalable. And the big thing here is this orchestration manager. So what this allowed us to do since the release of Exascaler 6 is first we got some HA improvements. So that was the base. You couldn't have machines failing over when you really didn't need them to fail over. For example, if you're on a multi-rail setup and one of your network links goes down, you really don't need to fail over, right? But HA didn't know any better. It would fail over and cause all kinds of fun stuff. So we don't do that anymore. That's just one of the things that we were able to introduce. Automatic config generation, which is for some reason it keeps advancing without me telling it to. But so when we deploy a file system, there's this config file you write out, and you feed that into a tool that goes and configures all of your servers and puts all the right IP addresses in the right place. And those config files were manually generated. I used to generate these config files, and a lot of times there was copy paste. A lot of times I would fat finger things, and there are times when things, human error, right? Things get in there that shouldn't be in there or don't get set right, and you don't notice it until you're in production later, and then you have to take outages to fix it. So one of the things that EMF has done is that we now just feed IP addresses and relevant information into a tool, and it generates a very standard looking configuration with no errors, no typos, and it's the same every time. The next thing we did is we created some health tools, because you want to see how your file system as a whole is doing. You don't want to log into every machine and look at it. You want to see what your network is doing. You want to see what the hardware itself is doing, and you want to do it from one place. So EMF has these tools in it that allow you to look at various parts of the file system without having to go to a bunch of different tools in a bunch of different places to do it. We also integrated Prometheus exporters into EMF. So now you can take all of these things and monitor them in your own environment. So everything from disk to client, you can monitor using various Prometheus exporters, either in your own environment, or you can use our tool, which is DDN Insight, which is a very robust tool that not only lets you look at the health of your system, but also how it's working, how the I/O is happening across the system, what kind of MDT calls are being made, all of that stuff, and it records it over time. So if you run a job and you make some changes and you run it again, you can go back and look at how these things affected the I/O on the system and make changes accordingly. And last but not least, this is still a work. All of those things are already in the product. We're still working on. Is the holy grail, right? Online upgrades of Lustre. So we can do online upgrades today, but they're not automatic yet. With Exascaler 7, that's one of the deliverables for Exascaler 7 is online automated upgrades. So you take your new version of your code, you load it to EMF, you say go, and then it goes and does it for you. It updates the hardware, all the firmware, the file system, and everything, and you don't have to take an outage to do it. So this has put us in a position to work with some very, very large systems, very, very, very large systems. And customers are now coming to us who are not traditional HPC customers because of all the AI work that we've done, and asking us to do things that we haven't traditionally done. I think I just skipped a slide because this thing keeps moving around on me. But one of the upshot of what this EMF tool and all this work we've done over the last 2.5 years has allowed us to do is that we can now deploy a Lustre file system faster than the vendor that does the networking can deploy the networking, and the vendor that does the compute can deploy the compute. We're usually the fastest thing to get done. So a customer of ours, since we can scale to these kinds of sizes, asked us to work on this Apache Spark workload. Apache Spark, as you probably can know, is not a traditional HPC use case. And there are reasons why it isn't. Spark does writes very differently than what we normally do. It essentially creates a temp file, and that temp file is then renamed to whatever you need it to be, whatever directory it's going into. And in Lustre, that presents a problem because a rename locks your whole MDT during the rename operation. So if your every write requires a rename, that means you've serialized all of your writes. That's a problem. On top of that, if the directory that you're going to put this file in has a project ID and that project ID doesn't match, when you try to do a rename, the kernel will kick back, this is an external device, and now you have to copy the file instead of a rename. So all of your I/O is now, all of your writes are now being done as serialized and then copied, which is not good. And I actually ran into this paper, I think it was written at Berkeley, somebody trying something like this. And what they had, there was about halfway into it, there's this graph that shows all this benchmarking they've done on, well, if you tune it this way, it behaves like here's how NFS behaves, and here's how all these other things that we've done make it do. And if you look at the very, very bottom of the graph near zero, that's the writes. So if you're trying to do, as in the case of this workload, terabytes per second of throughput, do a serialized writes is just not going to cut it. So this is where WAM Cloud came in. And we said, hey, guys, what do we do? And we started writing patches. So the first thing we did was and these are all the LUs. You can go, look at these if you want a little bit more detail than a dumb sales guy can give you. The first thing we did was we started differentiating from renaming directories to renaming files, because files can be renamed in parallel. The reason we lock the MDT is because if you try to rename a directory, all kind of havoc happens. We don't like to do that. So now files can be renamed in parallel. Directories still need a lock. The next thing that we had to do is make sure that when you do this rename, that the rename happens on the same MDT as the original parent, so that still works. And with those two things, great. We had parallel renames, and we saturated the MDS threads, and all the other stuff came to a grinding halt because Lustre is not used to doing that many rename operations in the process of doing writes, right? So the next thing we had to do is move the threads that do those renaming operations to a different set of threads. I think we're using the DOM threads to do this, so that Lustre can still do the other things that it needs to do other than just writes. Once we got all that squared away, the last thing we put in place is WAM Cloud. It wasn't me. I didn't do any of this, but so when you rename rename a file, and the directory that it's going into has a project ID, we change the project ID first, so that when you do a rename afterwards, it's a rename and not a copy. So with all of these things in place, we were able to get this customer up and running. The patches took a couple of days to do. After the patches were done, we spent about 2 weeks testing them very, very extensively to make sure that it didn't break anything else. And then we delivered it to the customer. And the customer went into production. Everybody's happy. It was good time was had. All of these changes are also available in the community, Lustre. So we're not just doing this for our own thing and keeping it to ourselves. This is actually available in the 2.16 Lustre. So if you are interested in trying to do something with Apache Spark and Lustre, try it. It might work. You might be surprised. Not the kind of thing we traditionally do, but really cool. That's kind of all I had, but as this for some reason keeps advancing the slides for me, if you like this kind of stuff, and you know, we're in a room full of Luster engineers that do this sort of thing all the time, DDN is hiring. I think we have like 20 or 25 open recs, all technical. So, you know, from WAM Cloud to QA to support engineers, we're really looking for some people. So if anybody here is looking for something interesting and new to do and work with this kind of stuff, talk to us. We're here and we'll talk to you. Thank you.